Hey y'all, I'm Michael Reshaw with Recirculating Farms, and today we're going to talk about compost tea. So compost tea is one of my favorite things to use in the garden. It has a lot of benefits and it's very easy to make. So some of the benefits of compost tea are adding beneficial nutrients and microbes to your soil, helping prevent against pests and disease, and being a very cost-efficient way of feeding your soil and your plants. So what is compost tea? Compost tea is a mixture of water and different materials that help feed microbes inside of the water, and then this water is then used to inoculate your soil and also the leaves of your plants. So compost tea can be used as a soil drench or as a foliar feed. I like to use it as both. So the way that we create compost tea is by getting a container. We have a 5-gallon bucket. You can also use smaller pails. You can use packing bins. Anything that can hold water and won't leak is something that you can use to start your compost tea in. So the next thing you need is a way to introduce the microbes into your water. We do that by introducing compost to the water. So we take some finished compost from our compost pile, and then we put that into our compost tea bag to introduce the microbes. Another thing that you need is food for these microbes. Some of the food that we use are unsulfured molasses, fish emulsion, liquid seaweed, and then we also add in a little bit of rock dust to add in some other things for them to feed on and add trace minerals into our compost. So aside from feeding the microbes, you also have to create a beneficial area for them to be in. So as we all know, when water sits around, it starts to smell really bad and it becomes stagnant. That is because anaerobic bacteria and microbes begin to take over that water. Anaerobic bacteria and microbes form from there being a lack of oxygen in the environment. We introduce oxygen to the environment by using an air stone. So by having an air stone and an air pump into your compost tea, it will constantly circulate that water and constantly be adding oxygen to that water, creating a very beneficial area for your microbes to multiply. And these microbes are the things that will break down the nutrients that are inside of the compost, the fish emulsion, the rock dust, and the liquid kelp. These microbes break down those nutrients and make them readily available for your plants, which is the big reason why compost tea is so effective. Another big benefit of using an aerator, such as an air stone, is that it helps dechlorinate your water. I let my air stone run for about 24 hours to make sure that all of the chlorine is dissipated from my water. This is especially important if you're using city water, but less important if you're using things like rainwater from a rain barrel or from another rainwater catchment system, as well as less important if you're using well water. So a few other things that you might need are a drill or a drill bit to poke a hole into your top for your air tube. You'll need some cheesecloth to act as the tea bag for your compost tea. And you will also need a way to apply the compost tea. Pump sprayer, hand sprayer. You can also use things like a watering can or even just a cup. And you'll also need some utensils to help you measure out your different ingredients. It's not necessarily important to have the exact amount of ingredients that I put into it. It's more so about keeping the exact same ratios. So the first thing you need to get started making your compost tea is get a water source. So like we mentioned before, this can be rainwater from some type of rainwater catchment system like a rain barrel. This can be well water, or it can be city water straight from your tap. So after you're getting your water source, the next step is to get it dechlorinated. We're going to dechlorinate our water source by setting up our aerator, which is comprised of our air pump and our air stone. You can buy an air pump at any pet store. This is just a normal aquarium air pump. You can also buy them at Amazon or any big store, any big box store in your neighborhood. They usually come with a little bit of air tubing. You'll also need an air stone. If your air pump doesn't come with tubing, I'm sure your air stone will. And if neither do, it should be in the same section as both of these items. So after you have both of these items together, you're going to open up your container and you're going to measure out how much air tube that you need. You want your air stone to be at the bottom of your container, whether that's a bucket or a packing container. You always want your air stone to be at the bottom. So we'll measure it out. It can still stick out a little bit, so we can connect it to our air pump. So now after we do that, we'll cut our cord to size. After cutting your air stone cord to size, you're then going to drill the hole for that air stone. You want this hole to be about the exact same size as the cord, so that there's no air escaping and it's a perfect fit. Then we can feed our tube right through the hole. So after you drill your hole and you connect your air tube, your air pump, and your air stone, it's time to find a power source. After you find that power source, make sure that the water is circulating and you see some oxygen bubbles going up to the top. And you should let that run for 24 to 48 hours to ensure that all the chlorine has dissipated from the water. After setting up your bucket and water and you start the dechlorination process, the next step is to set up your tea bag. So today we're going to use some cheesecloths to set up our tea bag, but you can use things like nylon stockings, old socks, really anything that you think will hold the material but still have fine enough holes for the material to leach out just like it would tea into a cup. So after you get your tea bag laid out, the first thing that you want to add to it is some finished compost. So the job of the finished compost is to add the beneficial bacteria, microbes, and nutrients to your water. And you can get this compost from your home compost pile. You can buy finished compost from a garden store or another big box store. It really doesn't matter as long as it's teeming with microbes and it's completely finished. You also want to make sure that you're picking out any large pieces of the compost. You want this to be very thin, very fine textured compost. The next thing that you want to add to your compost tea bag is your molasses. You want to make sure that it's unsulfured molasses. Unsulfured molasses adds a lot of sugar and food for your microbes and bacteria, and we're going to add just 1 tablespoon of this to our compost tea. So the next thing that you want to add to your compost tea bag is some rock dust. Here at Recirculating Farms, we like to use Azomite. The Azomite or the rock dust is going to add lots of minerals and lots of trace minerals and calcium and other things for the microbes and bacteria to feed on, which will help release micronutrients into your soil. Another thing that you can add to your compost tea, this is the optional step, is to add some sort of bat guano or some other type of animal-based fertilizer. So we're going to use bat guano. Another thing that I really like to use is Peruvian seabird guano. And we're going to add 1 tablespoon of that. The job of the bat guano and the Peruvian seabird guano is to add more food and fuel for those beneficial microbes and bacteria and to create more beneficial nutrients inside of the mixture. So those are the final items that I'll add into the compost tea bag themselves. But don't worry, there are more things that we're going to add to the water. So the other ingredients that we're going to add are going to be added directly to the water after the water has been fully dechlorinated. So what we're going to add is some fish emulsion and some liquid seaweed or liquid kelp. These are other items that you can find at your local gardening store, big box store, or even find on the internet. The brands are usually about the same, but it's always good to do your research. These add more nutrients and more things for the beneficial bacteria and microbes to feed on, and will ultimately lead to having more nutrients and trace minerals and better biology inside of your compost tea. So now that your water is fully dechlorinated, you've added in your fish emulsion and your liquid seaweed, it is time to add in your tea bag. I like to have my tea bag hanging just a little bit off of the edge so it's not completely submerged in the water, but you can also drop it right down in there. I like to also mention that some people don't use tea bags at all. Some people do what's called a free swirl method. That's when you put all these ingredients directly into the water and let them mix around on their own. The reason why I don't like this method is because it becomes a lot harder to apply. When you go to apply compost tea and you don't have it secured inside of that bag, the tea bag, you then have to deal with all those floating particles in the water, and they can clog up your sprayers and your watering cans. So after you've added your liquid seaweed, your fish emulsion, and your tea bag, and that tea has been brewing for 24 to 48 hours, you finally have a finished batch of compost tea. It's time to check it out. So now we're about to apply the compost tea. The best time to apply your compost tea is usually in the morning because that's when the stomata are the most open and they can absorb the most amount of nutrients. If you're going to apply it at another time, I would do it at night. You don't really want to do it during the day, in the middle of the day, because you have that direct sun that's really just going to make everything evaporate before the plants in the soil get a chance to absorb it. When you use a sprayer like this, it's best to put it on a mist so you can completely cover the leaves of the plant. I like to spray at the top and then spray again from underneath. If I'm gonna do a root drench, I take the nozzle off of the sprayer and I use the wand by itself. This is because the stream setting on these sprayers are often too strong and can really do damage to your soil. And that concludes our video on compost tea. Please check out our other videos that cover a wide variety of topics. See y'all later.